Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. In this video I'm going to be talking about the real hidden enemy in hi-fi audio, which is the VIA solution. So stay tuned in and watch. Good, so I'm going to in this video cover some pretty nerdy subjects, so I suggest that you guys stay in for the duration of the video. It's probably gonna be something like 10 minutes. These are really good inside pieces of information, so stay tuned in for that. The first point here is that everything that removes a direct response by solving a problem on the surface, but in the long run contributing to a slight audio degradation, those are things that we want to avoid, and that's what I mean by VIA solutions. So I'm talking about stuff like Macintosh. When they put all of these things in the amplifier, do not for a second think that that does not affect the sound. I had a Macintosh amplifier, and I had other stuff with watt meters and all of these features, and the way that they get away with having all of these features is basically by moving the sound into a completely different area where it is not as natural and responsive compared to the optimal solution. Okay, and that's what you want. If you want good audio, you want something that's responsive, that will react to cables and plugs and speakers and all of that. When you start doing these things, having watt meters, having bass, treble, balance knobs, having clip protection, equalizer, stuff like this. It's not only Macintosh that does it, but a lot of manufacturers are doing this. What you essentially are doing is you're putting the whole music in a hi-fi mode, and you're lowering the quality of sound that comes out at you. So basically you're putting it in a grip, and you're isolating the details, and you're running it in a very safe mode. And it can, to some degree, when you're used to gear that isn't quite as good, sound extremely good. When I got my Macintosh and I tried Acrophase and a lot of other gear like that, and Pass Labs, when you're moving up to that gear from regular gear like a Denon amplifier or a NAT amplifier or some regular piece of equipment, yes, it sounds 10 times better. But the problem is that most people that listen to music will only know this world. It actually gets a lot better looking past these solutions. Once you get up to Kondo, Audio Notes, Spectral, De Agostino, Griffin, those types of brands, then we're really talking about immediate reaction to stuff happening in the system. So I'm just going to cover these things here by reading what's on the list. So we want to avoid watt meters. We want to avoid electrical measurements of stuff calculating signal, like an LED display. Okay, the more stuff that's connected to the power grid on your amplifier, the more it's going to affect the sound and hold the music hostage. The more it's going to normalize the music, meaning that the decibel peak level that goes from bottom to top, that's going to be like squeezed together, almost compressed and controlled and held in a leash. So it's going to be slightly polite and just not letting fully go of the music. And that's very difficult in this hi-fi world, to solve a problem where you don't make the sound overly polite or overly safe to keep it in check. You know, it's almost impossible. So just to let you guys know that we want the signal as short as possible with the highest quality parts. We don't want specifications. We don't want lowest distortion. We don't want the biggest number of watts. Believe me, it does affect the audio signal with lowest distortion and biggest number of watts, but it only fixes the problem at a very superficial level. So you have to go past that in order to really know what good sound is like. So we don't want surge or clipping protection. We don't want built-in headphone amplifier jack. And we especially don't want Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. That's also going to make it really polite and hanging, where the music is hanging towards the speakers, not being let like that, being fully let go. We also don't want a bad fuse box. Most pieces of equipment have a very safe fuse box, meaning that it adds an entire piece of circuitry extra to the signal. Okay, there's no direct connection, meaning that when you get these overly sophisticated fuse boxes, you have the fuse, you have it in the box, and you have this like rerouting system. You want something that's as high quality as possible and has a short a signal as possible, and then you want the cable interacting with that being as good as possible. That's how you get really good sound. You also, like I said before, want to avoid equalizer, and especially having a motor on a part meter. So part meter, that's the volume knob that you have. And about 99%, I'm just guessing here, of audio gear has a motor on it. And you might think, why does that even matter? When you have a motor on it, you have basically an extra thing on the signal, okay? And every time you have an extra thing on the signal, you basically take energy away from the signal, and you have to put that energy back in again, meaning that you have to have an it's difficult to explain, but you basically have to revolt the signal again, and you can hear that when it's going through this entire loop of parts that is constantly taking a signal in and then revolting it, taking a signal in, revoltering it, filtering it, converting it. You're not getting the direct response. You're getting like a soft-ish, mushy kind of response, and everything becomes just, it just becomes boring and it meaningless. You don't feel mesmerized and like, oh, I have to listen to this. It removes the sound experience completely by simply not making music relevant. If you have a really good piece of equipment, it's then so good you can't physically move your body over to the amplifier and turn it off. You just physically can't get yourself to do that. And what I see with most equipment nowadays is that it just sounds so boring and irrelevant. Okay, they've solved a lot of they've solved a lot of noise problems and such, but if you're solving a noise problem by making the sound irrelevant and boring and over-controlled and polite, and there are also once in a while companies that go in the complete opposite direction that actually make it more digital and harsh to listen to. That's also bad in a different way. So basically, you want the best components in the world, and you don't want to mess with the signal. You don't want any measuring equipment. You don't want any features. You don't want the vias, which is the real enemy. You don't want all this stuff controlling the sound. You just want it to be itself and do its thing without having anything else in that circuitry. That is how you get good equipment. So, and also angling a speaker. If you have a speaker that's angled, that's a good way of compensating by by angling it up or maybe away from you. But again, it gives you a type of time phase delay that makes the music more pleasant, but it also removes direct response. I have to say that Fenderstein, they did this with their speakers, and they actually did a pretty decent job, unlike many other manufacturers. So just want to say it can be done, but still it's compensating, and you're not getting that snap attack, you know, that where you really feel that the energy is charging up and then it just fully releasing like that, convincingly, you know. And yeah, you kind of want to avoid that. And then 12th point here is that most resistors that most gear on the market has are really, really, really bad. And they're keeping the sound in a very dead and safe zone, so you won't hear how bad the equipment really is. But once you get into equipment that's actually pretty good, I'm talking about ear amplifiers, JDIS amplifiers, Kondo, Audio, really good brands, you know, then at that point you actually want to put really good resistors in, because these are things that typically give you a very much more, what can I say, evolved type of sound, especially the instruments and the voices become very different once you get up into the really good resistors. It just becomes magical, and you get filled with deep emotions. But most cheap resistors are keeping the hi-fi sound sorry, completely over in the hi-fi direction. It's keeping it separated, it's keeping it overly smooth, it's keeping it too safe, and it's just not representing the best of sound that we can achieve with our equipment. You're not getting the natural colors and everything like that. So once you have some good equipment, I suggest trying to do that. There are actually some pretty good power bars out there, pretty basic ones, where you can change resistors in them. Of course, you have to get a professional to do that in order for that to be safe, but you can really change a piece of equipment to be so much better by just changing the resistors. But it's of course a trap, because if you change resistors to something that's far better than what's inside the gear that you're dealing with, you're opening up the equipment to basically display a lot of noise, and it won't be able to control that type of sound. So you need a good bass, you need a good design, you need a good brand, and a relatively expensive model usually. Then you can experiment with resistors, and those are key for keys elements of really tuning into the highest quality sound. And yeah, most gear, I would say, like at least 90% of the gear out there has really bad resistors in them, only costing less than $1. So yeah, try and look into that if you can. One thing I also noticed was that point 13 here is that if you have a long power cable from the wall socket over to your power bar, I'm talking about more than 2 meters, it affects your sound in a very negative way. So I would suggest that you try and not necessarily go for an expensive cable, but let's just say that you're using a normal $1 cable. Try and use a 50 centimeter or a 200 centimeter cable, or maybe even a 100 centimeter cable, to see if that gives you a better sound that you will like. But often what you get when you shorten the cable is that you get a better coupling effect, meaning that it's more focused, it's more detailed, it has a better reaction. But it also opens up the sound, so you get to hear a more critical view of what's going on in your system. So you just have to be aware of that. So yeah, try that. And yeah, definitely those people that I visited that had 10, 20, 30 meter power cables from the wall socket over to the power bar, it just creates a lot of chaos in the sound in all kinds of ways. Now, what we also want to avoid is another via called DSP-DSD. It's basically a good way of controlling sound at a lower level, but if you want to reach that really optimal sound that is possible with your equipment, I suggest not having DSP and DSD, because it is a lower level of fixing a problem that does not solve it at the root cause. So just so you guys know, but yeah, use it when you have a relatively low quality piece of gear. And also I noticed that certain speakers that use a soft type of MDF compressed piece of material, for example, B&W, how they make their speakers. It has an interesting way of affecting the sound. It does make it more pleasant usually and more forgiving, but it also removes the proper response, so you're getting a compensating effect. Now, if you like that type of sound, fine, but that is the reason why I am not a big fan of B&W speakers, because I feel that with the combination of many units, big units, and these oversized cabinets that have this softish cardboard material, I feel that it kind of makes the sound more nice and polite than I want to listen to. And just wanted to let you guys know that that is a factor you have to take into consideration. I prefer the harder wood on the audio note speakers, a totally different opposite sound, but just letting you guys know that those two opposites exist, so you have to just find out what you like. And yeah, I used to be pretty deep into the LP vinyl world, and it actually took me quite a while to figure this out. But when you start at the bottom, of course you have these thin platter LP players, that ceramic thing that you look at, and yeah, they're ceramic. What I discovered was that when you have a small amount of mass, a small platter, when you increase that, when you go from a smaller to a bigger one, yes, you do get a sound difference, and usually it becomes more evolved, but it also has some problems when you get into these deep platters, which is in terms of precision and coupling effect, where the motor that drives the turntable has a tendency of kind of living its own life, not being able to precisely and firmly drive the sound. So I actually consider the smaller platter on a higher quality scale a better solution than these big platter LP players. See, what I keep hearing when I listen to other people's LP sound is again this safe, almost old type of LP sound, where you kind of park the music in this very safe zone where it doesn't react. And that's what happens when you have deep platters on LP players. It's forgiving, it's more smooth, it's more cool, and in a way it kind of sounds better, but you're kind of losing the precise coupling effects. So actually I would suggest going away from these deep platter LP players onto a smaller platter, just like Audionote makes with their TT2 and 3 designs. And what actually makes those platter designs good is not the platter themselves. It's the fact that they have a small, not deep platter with a really good coupling to some motors, either 2 or 3 motors. That is a crucial part of getting the highest quality LP sound, because when you have deep platters and you have these single engines, it just doesn't, what can I say? It just doesn't have the same amount of timing and grunt. Yeah, grunt is the key word. So it kind of feels like it's running its own life, being a bit overly smooth, a bit old, a bit noisy. So that's an illusion that a lot of manufacturers create, that the deeper the platter, the better the LP player, but it's actually opposites. And Audionote are basically the only ones that figured this out. So yeah, I'd suggest going for that. And also the long tone arms, they're actually also not very good. Don't get me wrong, it's a similar situation. You move from the basic tone arms to the longer tone arms, and typically it gets a lot better, mostly. But again, timing issues, grunt, it just doesn't keep the music at a low noise level. It has a tendency of opening up for a host of really huge amount of problems when you have these long tone arms. And I suggest not going for the long tone arms, actually going for a high quality, shorter tone arm if that's possible. And power boxes. Yeah, we've got power boxes. They are a big Achilles heel in most designs. Power boxes, yeah, power boxes that have separate groups and protections and filterings. You have to beware of those. So we basically we don't want to extend the signal in the circuitry to solve problems. I know it sounds silly, but it just is what most brands do, and it's just you kind of have to experience it for yourself to know that it actually exists. A lot of the products out there are creating an image where they're saying specifications, woo, watt meters, all of this nice stuff. But it can basically do everything except for playing really high quality music and making all of your music sound good. And that's just the problem. A lot of the products just sound like products, and we want to get away from that. So I know it's a bit much me covering all of these things, but it's kind of worth it, letting you guys know of all of these inside pieces of information that actually improve the sound. So another problem is that you have the built-in clock function, which is in a streamer, a DAC, even your own router or a digital amplifier. And the problem with that design is that is a design built on you having a really good amount of good hardware in your system to keep that clock perfect. Now, I discovered a short while ago that a friend showed me this on his streamer, that he used a Gustard U16 external box that he connected to his streamer. And by doing that, he could actually take the clock away from the streamer and then use this thing instead, which was relatively cheap. But the key thing that made this Gustard U16 box really good was that he got a much better than standard LPSU box that he put on it. And once you start doing these things, the sound actually gets a lot better. Now that's a case where we actually running an extra via but improving the sound. So that is like the only exception to the rule that I would use. So you're basically revolting a signal on the clock part. And I suggest if you guys are able to do that on a streamer, that you go and do that. I'm seriously surprised that CD players, DACs, routers, digital amps don't have this feature as an external box on their pieces of equipment. If manufacturers would be able to do this, and it does not cost a lot. I mean, the Gustard U16 box, how much does that cost? Like £100 or something? I don't know how much it costs. But it does not cost a lot doing this, and it can make the sound so much better, so much more controlled, powerful, and so much less harsh doing this. So yeah, really good tip for you guys. And yeah, these motors that we have on LP players are generally really bad. I mean, really, really bad. You need a really good motor, or 2 or 3 or 4, or how many you now use. And then you need a really good coupling function. And a lot of motors just aren't coupled to the LP platter in a way that it gives you a proper drive and grunt and makes the music interesting and exciting and fresh. They're all most LP sound is going towards this old safe sound. It's kind of laid back. It's a bit like the Macintosh LP sound or the VP sound. Don't get me wrong, that's still a pretty good sound compared to the lower gear, but it can still get a lot more fresh and interesting and fun with a lot more grunt. So yeah, I suggest going for something like Audionaut. They know what they're doing, you know, having several motors, having a good coupling, having a low platter, having short arms. They have basically the best cable, the best plugs, and which again no other manufacturer really does at that level. And that combination just makes LP sound so much more alive and responsive, and like it interacts with you, you know, instead of you just listening to some old farty sound that makes a lot of noise, that's in this safe non-responsive zone. So yeah, and just wanted to make this clear that most LPSUs that are used with hi-fi systems, these standard LPSU boxes, which is linear power supply boxes, most of them are horrible, absolutely horrible. So if you own something like a Gustard U16 clock box or an Uptown Audio Isorigin box, these are boxes that can give you a performance that is much, much better if you just get a custom LPSU box for it, okay? And custom LPSU boxes are difficult to make and they cost a lot of money, but that's a good investment. I suggest people doing that instead of investing a lot of money in a CD player or a DAC or a streamer. this is the way that you make your own streamer by having a clock box and an Isorican USB cleaner, and that you have a much better than standard LPSU box that actually comes with these products. So just to let you guys know. And also, again, a bad VIA is that we don't want bad sonic materials, such as glass in an audio room, from windows or furniture, stuff like that. It has a tendency of making the sound very excited, where it kind of jumps towards you in a harsh way, almost hitting you. So I will try. I would definitely avoid that one. And again, talking about VIAs, we don't want to convert signals. Converting signals is what most manufacturers do. Okay, you have a cable, then you convert it, then you put it into another type of cable. It goes into from the DAC to the amplifier. Then in the amplifier, it converts it. When stuff like this happens, which it actually does a lot in a typical hi-fi system, you just don't get the music, the experience of excitement. It doesn't grab you. It gets overly controlled and polite. So yeah, just letting you guys know that exists. And I've seen a lot of really good high specification lower end products that have like really good stuff on paper, but then when you look at them inside, they're like, okay, how on earth does this thing get any power? Because it's basically just chips, the whole thing, chip-based designs. And that's the problem with a lot of lower end gear, is that it's chip-based designs, and even though it's on a theoretical level very high, it's still chip-based. It can't move power from chip-based boards to another device via the power cables and the signal cables, because there's just not a decent transformer in it, and the way that it's coupling the energy is not at a very high level. So on paper it looks good, but really isn't that good. And another VIA you want to avoid is power bars with big filters that take care of spikes, that divides a signal into several groups. It does on paper look very good, but the problem is that, again, when we're dealing with cheap products, they have cheap filters that deal with this in a cheap way, and if it at the same time uses a certain type of cable that isn't compatible with all the power cables that you have, again, negotiation there, even though it looks good on paper. And you see what I'm getting with this? It's just not sustainable. And that's just what I want to get across, is that you want to keep the signal as short as possible. So summarization, yeah, short as possible, highest quality parts, no gimmicks, no features, just so it has a direct response instead of compensating with cheaper parts and focusing on non-relevant technical specifications, like, for example, low distortion. It has many watts and such. When a manufacturer starts focusing on low distortion, 0. blah 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 blah, low distortion, then you just know that the quality of parts aren't really that good, and that they're just relying on a really good design, and basically marketing the product. So yes, many watts do solve a problem on a theoretical level, because if you have a huge amount of watts, the first watt hitting the speaker from the amplifier is in theory going to be better, because there's more force pushing it through. But still, when you create that amount of energy, there are certain ways of doing that reflects on the design that is doing this. And it typically does it in a way where it takes the music hostage, making it seem very detailed. Everything's very separated. You can't really tell exactly where the soundstage starts and ends. You can't really clearly see the left and the right side. There's typically not a very deep part of the soundstage. Now, if you had a really, really good piece of gear, what you would hear is something like this. You would have a mental picture of almost like the sound traveling to you through a long corridor, but the thing that's sending the signal to you through that long corridor is almost on what feels like another planet, you know? That's the type of sound that's really good, okay? And what a lot of gear is doing is just, it's giving you information, but it's flat. So there's no significance or substance behind that information. Now, I experienced this a lot when I tested gear like Sennheiser headphones, top HD 100 series, Ultrasone headphones. Just a lot of gear. I also say I got this effect a lot when I tested Macintosh, Past Labs, a lot of other transistor-based gear. They basically do this, that they have a lot of information, and yeah, it's a lot cooler than the other lower class gear, but it just doesn't feel like it's really emanating from real human like artists. And you can't when you're listening to a violin, it sounds like it's coming out of a PC instead of it actually being generated by a flesh and blood human being, you know. I can, on a really good system, when I hear a violin, I can hear almost what type of violin it is, and if it's using some good or some bad strings. I can hear the intention of the artist, and I can hear what he's conveying and why he's conveying it, and exactly the method that he's using to convey that signal. And you can't really do that with a lot of these other very detailed pieces of equipment, because it's just information. You're not getting the whole story of the information, the what and the why and the how and all of that. It's just information. And when you're just getting information, you're not getting a true, deep, meaningful experience. So yeah, that was basically all, and I hope this helps you guys in finding equipment that you guys feel is relevant. It actually plays really good music, and yeah, I suggest trying gear like, you know, just starting at gear like YBA Passion series, or even their better Signature series, or Tube Guru, top Tube Guru gear, or top ear gear, or Jadis. They make some good amplifiers, and Audionaut, Kondo, Spectral, Negra, D. Agostino, Griffin. Those are basically the only brands that I would suggest that people try. Once in a while, that there are, you know, crap brands that actually make one or two pieces of gear probably every 10 years. That's actually, you know, pretty decent. And I know that I'm sometimes a bit harsh on Macintosh, Past Labs, and Mark Levinson, because they actually do make a pretty decent sound, and I think that most people should at least try them. I just feel that this viewpoint that I have on actually fully understanding what it is, what you're hearing from these brands, will kind of wake people up to just at least try the more expensive gear. And it usually takes gear that is more expensive, but once you've tried it and you recognize these things that I say, man, it just makes music so much more exciting to listen to. So when it isn't overly controlled and put into boxes and separated, it doesn't become a chore or a depressing type of thing that you do. It just fills you with energy, and that's what the whole experience is supposed to be, and that's what I want to kind of bring back into this world, because I feel that a lot of gear is just overly polite and steered and controlled, and it just, I don't know, a lot of it almost you just almost feel like hanging yourself sometimes, because it's just so depressing. I remember listening to Itzhak Perlman. I've said this to a couple of friends. I've listened to that on Past Labs, Mark Levinson, and what's it called, Macintosh and Classy, and it actually sounded quite horrible. And I know that music doesn't sound like that, but that's the thing. These pieces of equipment that have all of these features, they have a pretty hard time conveying very beautiful music that has a lot of underlying complexities, and I just kind of wish we could get this back into this world, It kind of annoys me. And I've also, don't get me wrong, I'm not the kind of guy who wants to say this, but I've also listened to audio note equipment where I thought, man, this is something wrong here, and typically that would be because it was an older piece of equipment, and the guy setting it up took a lot of shortcuts. But yeah, I've heard probably 1% of their equipment also sounding really not that great either, So, but still, compared to everything else that's out there, I would still say that the kind of ridiculously ahead of time in regards to getting that true deep connection with the music, so you actually feel that this is relevant and this is unfiltered at a very high level and not filtered at a very low level. And I just kind of want to bring that back, and that's why I'm doing this channel. So that's everything for today, guys. And try and like this video if it was something that you would maybe want to listen to again, or also try and subscribe, because I've got a lot of other good videos coming out. So that was all for today, and have a nice day. Bye.